Looks like James,
Hi, James.
he's muted.
Yep. And unmute him for the moment. Hi, James.
Say hi.
Hi,
How
how are you all?
Hi, James. are
Thank
here
you for
a bit?
joining us.
You're welcome. Glad to be able to do it.
And there's Al again. Hi, Al. How are you?
Yeah, this is Al. I'm online.
Hi, Al. How are you?
So, like, if I see him doing this, A, B, I already know he's saying absolutely. So I'll say absolutely. Yes. Or,
Al, did you register for the call under a different name by any chance?
you can hear the word in your mind. Like, if he starts spelling a word, you'll be like, oh, I bet he's going to say that.
Hello.
That's actually you hearing the guy
Hi,
talk.
Al, did you register for the call under any other name by any chance?
Here, you can just, if you think you know the word, say it out loud and let them tell you yes or no, because that can
Okay.
save you a whole lot of time.
Hold on.
Okay, so what would you, right now, what would you like to communicate to the people's
Hold on.
phone?
Al, are you there? I'm guessing he's not.
I say you're probably right.
I'm thinking he's Alfred, that begins with an M, the Texan. Texan. I'm sorry, Al, if I'm mangling your name. And for those of you listening to the recording, we have started early to make sure that the recording is functional. So we've muted all the lines to keep the integrity of the recording. The presentation by Dr. Beverly Rubik will actually begin in about 20 minutes. So we appreciate your patience. Thank you.
You log out. Oh, Barbara's here. I see Barbara's here. Hi, Barbara.
And Tick, I set up for the live streaming, but I think the link that Lisa put in will have changed. So I want to make sure that it's functional. And then as soon as I do that, I'll put the actual link in the chat section.
Okay. One, two, three, four. Okay. If anybody has problems or a question about the connection, raise your hand. And if you don't know where that raising the hand is, there's a little hand up on the top toolbar as you bring your um, mouse up to it, and you can see it's over on the next to the phone on the right side of the top toolbar. You'll raise your hand, and I'll answer your question. Otherwise, we'll be waiting for a few minutes. And 1207.
What?
Yeah, I don't know who that's.
207, I have you unmuted. 689.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So I called this number, 857. I tried getting online so that I could get on what I did first is I went and used that, hold on, where is it?
Ballbridge?
The login number,
Yeah.
login,
Mhm.
and I couldn't get anything. So now I called 857-232-0035 and used the code 632-4919. And so now I'm talking with you, but it's just on the telephone.
Okay. Do you
So-
want to try the computer again?
Yeah, I'm using my iPad, so I want to try my iPad. Yep.
Okay,
If you
all
walk
right,
me
now-
through it, that'd be great.
Yeah. If you go to a direct internet, go onto your internet,
Okay, I'm on the internet.
and then go to callbridge.com.
CALL.
Bridge as in
BRIDGE
.com.
.com. Okay, I'm getting that. I'm getting there. Okay, callbridge.com. Okay, I'm there.
All right, and then when you see, there should be a thing that says join meeting.
It says showing results for Callbridge.
Oh, okay. There's one with there's something that goes to callbridge.com. I can't think of what it looks like.
It should be the first entry. It says callbridge.com.
Right. Okay, I've got that. And but the ad, there's an ad. Let's see. Okay, well I'll just it's Turbo Bridge. Let's see, Callbridge. Callbridge,
Call-
best audio video on online conference.
That's
calling
it.
call. Okay.
That's it.
So I'm going to hit that, and should I be hitting conference calls?
No, just click on that.
Okay, I'm clicking on that. Okay, I have expert audio, video, and web. It's a free trial. Oh, there says something, join meeting.
Click join meeting.
That's the one.
Okay, wait a minute. Let me okay, it's an app.callbridge.com. Got a little circle going. Oh, here it is. Oh, now there's an access code. Do you have the access code?
Yes, I do. 632
632
4919.
4919. Oh, that's the access code.
That's the access code.
Well, that's what I did when I called. Okay, I'm going to join conference. This is great.
Okay.
No, I'm not
when
there.
you get on, just hang up your telephone, please.
Yep. Okay. Now wait a minute. I have download the app, download and install the app, or YouTube Live, which I have to make a choice. Join your meeting. You still there?
I'm thinking.
Okay.
Because I haven't done it on an iPad. Lidra, any thoughts?
You shouldn't need to download anything. You should be able to go directly there.
Well, she's doing it
Well,
on an iPad.
doesn't give me a choice. I'll go to YouTube Live. I'll try that.
No, I
Won't
wouldn't
let
do
me
that.
And it won't
I
let
wouldn't
me
do
do
that.
that. So I'll
You can
download the
download.
app.
You can download the app.
Okay, this page will open in another application. Okay. Okay. Oh, call bridge. Okay, I'm going to get that.
You
Do I have to
know,
get
something
the
like
app?
crosshatch. The app has the crosshatches.
Yes, got that. Oh, now I need a sign in with Apple. Now I have to know what my Apple ID is. Now that's not fun.
Sorry, I didn't know it was going to be that much trouble for an iPad.
Yeah. Okay. Let me think what my Apple ID is. I don't think it's this, but I'll try. Nope. Oh, shoot. No, I'm not getting there. Nope. Well, I don't remember what my Apple ID number is.
Yeah, you should. Do you have a computer that has a video?
Well, yeah, I do. Okay, let me try that. Okay. Okay, I'm on my computer. And you want me to go to Callbridge? I'm going to go to Chrome browser. Callbridge.com.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's like the best this or something like that.
Oh, what? Oh, expert video. Yeah. Okay. And then join meeting.
My meeting.
Okay.
632.
Oh, not yet. Not there yet. This is a slow. It's a slow, whatever it's called. Okay. Access code 632.
Yeah. 4919.
4919. Okay. And join conference. Have an account. Join conference. Okay. So it should just go right in and join.
Yep.
Well, it's spinning. It's testing my network. Enter my name.
Okay. And who are we speaking with?
Julia Huttle.
Great. Thank you, Julia.
Okay. That's great. I guess I probably, does it have capitals mean important? I'll get capitals in here.
Oh, it doesn't much matter.
That's, well, you never know. Okay. Huttel. That's wrong. Okay. Okay. Internet. I want to connect audio with my computer's microphone. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to connect audio with my computer's microphone and speaker. Okay?
Yeah.
Browser permission is needed to continue. Oh my God.
No, that's all right. You just click on it. You'll be fine.
Pressing the allow button. Okay. Here's the allow button. Okay. Allow. Got it.
You will now enter the conference.
Oh, good. We're there.
Recording.
Yay.
Hooray!
Yippee-doo-doo-da. Well, so forth. Yep. Okay. Well, thank you.
All right.
You're welcome. We're going to mute you out now so that we don't have the echo.
And also hang up your phone, please. Hang up your phone. I'm going to I'm going to show my picture.
There you go. Okay.
Okay, so there's my picture. If people want to show their pictures, go
Hooray!
ahead. And
Who is SZ? SZ, you've been unmuted. Who are you?
That would be Sandy and Z, but I'm trying to be quiet.
Oh,
You
okay.
can mute,
Thanks. Bye.
you can mute me if I didn't.
Okay, bye.
And let's see,
And who else?
Carol Sachs. Sandy, Julia Huddle. Uh, let's see, where's Julia? Julia?
Unmuted. Oh, you want me to
I just,
unmute?
no, I just unmuted. I
Oh,
was looking for your
She's been one of the new ones.
registration.
She just registered. Vic. She's fine.
Okay, okay. I'll keep my nose out of it then. Thank you, Julia.
No, we're good. We're good.
I'm gonna mute you again. But I take it, Leader, you're
Yeah, I'm going through
looking
the
at,
list as we're. Yeah, yeah.
okay. All right.
Susan Collins has joined us. Hi, Susan. Who we got in the chat here?
I have,
Hi.
um, I'm gonna send
Yep.
something out to Rebecca and Elbry because they don't have any
Elbry's on
audio
here.
connect. I
Oh.
know, but they have no audio connected. They may not know that because we have them all muted.
Oh. Well, they may be on their phone as well.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't see their, I see one.
Hi, Julia. How you doing? I see you have your
well,
hand raised.
I've lost my video, but so I thought I'd check in and find out how to get that back.
Okay, well, right now Tick's just putting up something on the whiteboard. But if you'd like to
Oh,
put your video up, you hover towards the top of the screen and you'll see
Yeah.
a blue horizontal bar. And on
Okay.
that bar, you'll see a picture of a camera. If you click the camera, your video will come on.
Oh, okay. Okay, good enough. Thank you. I'll mute
Thank
myself
you.
again.
Perfect. Hi, we have someone from a 770 area code. Who am I speaking with?
Hi, this is Cindy
Hello.
from Georgia.
Hi.
Hi,
Hi, Cindy from Georgia. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm also on video. I've got video on without sound, and I've got sound on with video. And that was the only way I was able to make it work during the convention.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're figuring out a way to make it work. That's awesome. I just want to make sure that we were helping you as best we could. So that's perfect.
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Some reason here, I just lost my, I'm gonna log out and log back in, Deidre.
Okay.
Recording.
Hmm.
Okay, Beverly will be right back.
Oh, there she is. Okay, maybe I'll do some,
Magic tricks?
do some stuff here with the, just to show them how to use the call bridge just in case they don't know already.
Sure.
While now Beverly, what she do? She said she was gonna just be right back or something?
Yes, she said she'll be right back.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Um, well, while we're waiting for her to come back, um, I, I'm Tick Goodrow. I'll be, just sort of helping with the hosting here with Lidra Yablonsky. And I just want to show you some of the controls. If you don't already know the controls, um, right now everybody's muted, and we can mute you, or you can unmute yourself by pushing this button here, um, up here, and I'll share my screen. So up here is where you might mute. This is how you have your video. You can see yourself, you can see the people around you. You may at one time, if you start asking questions, that this is the share screen, please don't use it. This is the whiteboard, please don't use it. You have your hand right here, and you can push your hand whenever you have a question. Hi, Dr. Rubin.
Hi, hi.
Here's if you want to hang up. If you want to hang up the telephone, here's where you can hang up the telephone. Over here is chat. If you want to say something, open chat, and you can say something down here. It'll be with everybody. These are the participants. So you want to see the participants, you can see who they are. And this, I'm going to mute everybody and not allow you to unmute yourself. Just raise your hand. Raise your hand if you have a question. And if you want to make your screen big, there's full screen. And if you want to change your view, it says gallery view here, or speaker view. And what you want to do is get it so it says gallery view, and then you go over and you click on Dr. Rubik's face, and so she'll be nice and big for everybody. All right, so get it onto, so you can says gallery view here, and then go down and you find a pin on Dr. Rubik's face, and you click it, and that'll blow it up, and everybody will be able to see her big because she is the most important person on this call. So we want to hear what she has to say. So I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, one other thing down here, there's a hide or show button. And if you want to just get everybody out of the picture, so the only one there, you do that. If you want to see some other people on the call, you can show it, hide or show. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now. And now we see Dr. Rubik. Hopefully, let's see. Stop my video. So, Dr. Rubik, welcome again. It's good to see you.
Thank you so
And
much. It's a pleasure to be here again with all of you, and I look forward to a couple of interesting hours with you.
yes, I do too, and I'm sure everybody else does. So, without any further ado, please inform us.
Okay, as you know, I'm going to talk about 4G and health, and also a little bit about a possible relationship to the COVID-19 toward the end. I do have a question. If you folks have questions, I'd like you to interrupt me, but how am I going to recognize that? Are you going to stop me, Tick, and say there's a hand up and then call on them and
How do you want it done?
well, I don't know how to see anybody's hand raising. Right now I just see a bunch of initials. I've never used Callbridge for this kind of interaction. So where are the
Well,
hands
I'll tell
going
you
up?
what.
If
Sandy Olveri, would you raise your hand, please? Raise your hand. There
oh,
you
I
go.
see a little green thing showed up.
There's a little
Okay.
green thing on the right
Well,
side.
if
You
I
click
miss
on it
it,
and it
Tick,
shows. Yes,
I see.
that's why they pay me the big bucks.
Okay, so if I miss that little green thing because I may get carried away with my talk, Tick, say something so that we won't, that I can be interrupted during this talk. I'm planning on a couple of hours from the moment we start, just so you know. And I understand it's all being recorded, correct?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to share my screen. And let's see, my entire screen, I guess that's correct.
Yes.
And then I go down to get it, right?
Yep.
Okay. You see it? a slide that says
Yes, we do.
wireless radiation? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So that's the topic today. And um, last time we talked about the natural frequencies, the natural biofield, the frequencies of the geocosmic Earth in which we were born and evolved, etc. Today we're going to talk about the artificial frequencies, man-made, that especially the wireless ones, which are proliferating dramatically over the last couple of decades, and it seems like there's no stopping them. And there's a lot of growing concerns really about health and the environment. And I do wonder about even the dowsing response around all of these fields. Maybe we can talk about that later on, because some of you may have noticed changes in that over the decades that we've suffered and endured more and more wireless. Well, wireless in terms of health has been likened to smoking or even asbestos, because with asbestos you don't know it's in the air, but with smoking you can smell it, you know. And I remember when I was young, it was considered pretty glamorous to smoke and even recommended by physicians. These are some of the poster ads that I remember from the 1950s. Long gone, however, we gave up on that. But wireless has been called the tobacco of the digital age. And there are more and more devices in our environment. We're moving into what we might call a technocracy, a world that's really governed by pieces of technology in which we also run our lives, and everything from hearing aids with Bluetooth to smart meters that may have your toaster talk to your oven and tell the power company when you're using what, to Wi-Fi, to various computers, tablets, and of course smartphones, and new automobiles with wireless, and of course the new driverless cars that the promise of 5G will bring us. So it seems like there's an endless parade of these devices, and yet I don't hear many people, especially in the engineering realm, talking about the hazards. What the engineers are concerned about is whether there might be crosstalk between these devices. Maybe your toaster can't talk to your coffee pot after all. Maybe it'll mix it up with the toaster. That's the sort of thing the engineers talk about. Cross feed between devices, because there's only so many portions of the spectrum liberated, etc. So they seem busy trying to solve that problem, and I don't hear a shred of anyone talking about health. Now, this is a little bit about the history of wireless, going back to 1G, the first generation. The G means generation, and we're now moving on to 5G. So since 1996, so that's a good 24 years, we've had already, well, even 1992, we've had almost 3 decades of this, but the escalation really happened when smartphones were introduced in 2007. But even Wi-Fi in 2001, 19 years ago. And it's interesting because the frequency of Wi-Fi is exactly the same as that which heats food in a microwave oven or which heats water. And you may scratch your head and wonder, why did they pick that? Because that's one of those free bandwidths that any technology can use without paying money to the government, to the FCC, who parcels out the various bands of wireless to industry, to the military, etc. So yes, indeed, we have Wi-Fi that's literally cooking us like a low-grade microwave oven, and many of us have Wi-Fi in the home, in the office, and you can imagine dehydration is one effect, but there are numerous effects, as I'll talk about. So here are the bands allocated for 5G. Some of them are still down there in the microwave region, 600 megahertz, and also 3100 to 3500 megahertz. And then we jump up into the gigahertz. So the gigahertz is considered millimeter waves, and that's very different from microwaves. That's a step up in frequency. And look how many bands there are in 5G. It's much more extensive than 4G. And by the way, 5G is more of an evolving protocol than it is a particular frequency or band. What it means is that they're going to escalate the installation of 4G all over the world in antennas near our homes and schools and hospitals. And then they're going to add also 5G antennas, satellites, and they're going to blanket the world so that the entire world has wireless World Wide Web. That's the plan. And there will be part of this on Earth. Part of the infrastructure will be, as I said, more antennas, usually covered with a plastic shroud, power supplies that originally they were going to put on the ground that looked like mailboxes, but I think they're going to hang them up in the air because they're concerned about vandalism. There's been a lot of vandalism uh, throughout the UK, for example, and the Netherlands, as some people thought that 5G was really causing the COVID-19, that there was no virus, that it was 5G side effects causing the symptoms. And there was a number of vandals of towers that were burned and some in the US as well. So it's going to involve millions of new small cell antennas. Part of it is fiber optic cables. Now, if they stopped with that, and that's usually the chubby cable at the bottom of your telephone pole, which they strung in the last couple of years, at least in my region. Fiber optics is a great thing because it's light, carried over, let's say, a glass or plastic fiber. And there's no radiation associated with that that's harmful. The problem is they won't take the fiber optic cable into your home. We would like that. We want wires, but they're going to give us wireless from where this thing stops and where this antenna is going to blast our homes and schools and all the other places where we work. So, and then there's these clunky power supplies. They're probably going to be strung up on these poles as well. But in addition to the Earth infrastructure, there's going to be some 42,000 5G satellites put into lower Earth orbit. And three companies are mainly involved in this: SpaceX, which is Elon Musk's other company, another company called OneWeb, which is smaller, and then Amazon. Those are the three companies that will be launching satellites. And all of this is tremendously expensive. This is a multi-trillion-dollar change in infrastructure. So they expect to get back, of course, many trillions of dollars in return for this kind of investment. And, if we take a bird's eye look at the world, back in 1957 was the initial satellite launched by the Russians. It was called the Sputnik. I remember it well. And it was really amazing that something was now orbiting the Earth at that time. But we've had a lot more satellites for GPS and for other military purposes, etc. But 2018 will see and 19 and 20 we'll see these 42,000 satellites going up. And even now, you can see some of these satellites as lights in the sky at dawn or dusk in a line. People have reported them and they wonder what they are. And actually, astronomers find them completely disrupting their observations in visible region. So it's going to totally change space around the Earth as well as the Earth energy. It's a terraforming event, 5G. Uh, Now, between the United States and China, there's kind of a race going on. At least this is what I hear from President Trump and his administration. We want to do it before the Chinese do because we're concerned that if they do it, they'll be surveilling our population. Well, there's going to be surveillance of us one way or the other. Huawei is one of the major telecoms in China. They've already installed it in some cities. Wuhan had total installation in China before the outbreak. That installation was complete on October 31st, 2019. We'll talk about that possible link later on to COVID. So there is a fast track. The government, federal government, has mandated a fast track, almost undermining local governments from making judicious decisions about where to put these antennas, and in response to their citizens who have gone to meetings. We have groups all over. I know the group in Oakland, and I myself made a visit to the city council as well as the city planning committee, trying to bring in health and environmental issues, only to find out they said to me, "We have no jurisdiction over them." And I said, what? Well, you'll see why in a moment. Because of certain federal legislation, your local governments don't have jurisdiction over health and in the environment. The only thing they can discuss is a little bit about placement and the color and um, relative beauty or ugliness of the shape of the antenna. It's really quite ridiculous, but that's all they have jurisdiction over. So here are some of the laws that disable your local governments from squawking about health and environment. It goes back to a law that was signed by President Clinton in 1996. And who was thinking about wireless in 1996? I sure wasn't. But that act essentially said local governments can't do anything about health effects when considering proposed wireless installations. It's whatever the federal government says is okay in terms of levels, and if everything is measuring correctly in local governments, there's nothing they can do about it. And that's it. Then there was the FCC ruling. It's not a law, but it was considered practically as powerful as a law. The FCC is the Federal Communications Commission. That's the branch of the federal government that, excuse me a minute, the branch of the federal government that oversees the distribution of radio frequency bands to the military, to civilians, and to the telecom companies. It's a panel of 6 people, none of whom are scientists or trained in health or environment. They're basically engineers, and most of them have come from the industry. So basically, you have what Robert F. Kennedy would call a captured agency, captured by the industry, uh, ruling over us and telling us 5G is okay. And these people don't know anything about health and wellness and probably haven't read the same papers that I read. So FCC said the federal government is in total control of 5G rollout. And that's it, folks. We're on a fast track. And they gave local communities 60 days to review all the applications. And basically, cities were scrambling. The city of Oakland, where I live, had, I think it's not even a dozen commissioners in the planning commission, and suddenly they had all these applications from AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and others, where they wanted to install 5G and antennas and also 4G, the enhancedification of 4G, all over the city, and they had no time to review the placement. So basically, they were then rubber stamping it because of this fast track that was demanded by the federal government. Then, a couple months ago, President Trump signed into law a couple of new acts on 5G. Secure 5G and Beyond Act. One of them is to mandate that it isn't just cities that get 5G, that we also install it in rural areas and that we don't delay, that we get going and make even distribution as the rollout occurs. And then the Broadband Deployment Accuracy and Technological Availability Act. Again, making it available to all socioeconomic groups and knowing exactly what's been deployed where so that they have a map of where everything is. And all of this will simply boost 5G. And most of these laws have been basically written by the industry and presented through lobbyists to Congress, who then, because they get big payoffs for their campaigns from big telecom, they say, yes, sir. And they pass these things and we're stuck with them. So that's how it's been going on. So we're under a fast track rollout. There was a 60 to 90 day shot clock mandated by the federal government, FCC, late last year. Maybe it's slowed down because of COVID, but nonetheless, cities are scrambling to approve these permits for the antennas to go up. And I know that more and more satellites have been deployed. The word choice, notice, is not mine, but I see the industry using that military word. Not installation, but deployment. What you would use to speak about weapons in the military is how they use the words to talk about the installation of 5G. Another law on the books that has not really been respected is the National Environment Policy Act, otherwise known as NEPA, that goes back to 1969 and says for any major change in the environment, there needs to be an environmental review and a report. That's never been done for 4G or 5G. And so I know the Native Americans made a coalition and won a lawsuit in pretty high court in the federal government because they wanted to preserve their historic sites and their environments. So it appears that the reservations and some of these special historic sites owned by the Native Americans will not have 5G rollout, but of course there will be the satellites, but they won't have local antennas. They won a very important lawsuit by invoking this act, NEPA, as well as a National Historic Act pertaining to um, Native American historical locations. So this is the year, the target date for 5G rollout. 2019 was the beginning. I know they rolled it out in a few places very moderately, like Sacramento, California, part of Silicon Valley got some antennas. And right now, while we've been on a lockdown, they're rolling it out in the schools and in cities that you can't even see it happening. And I know this is so. I've encountered people who saw vans without lettering on them and equipment going in, and when they asked about it, they said yes, we're moving in 5G routers. So it remains to be seen what the 5G phones will look like. They're on their way. I haven't seen any, and most of the stores just carry 5G. But phones will still largely work on 4G, which is still the frequency of choice because it has more penetration than 5G. So 5G, at least is different. And I want to talk, first of all, the planned total coverage of the Earth and the terraforming of the land as well as the space around the Earth makes it hugely different from any previous generation. There will be millions of antennas, thousands of satellites blasting 4G and 5G frequencies everywhere, including in national parks where presently they are not. I notice my cell phone is dead when I go to national parks, and I'm grateful for that because I know how it can disrupt wildlife. So 5G is different. I'm going to show you in a subsequent slide how it involves focused beams, not exactly a laser, but a beam that moves out from source to user. That's very different from broadcasting. Even the word broadcasting means like dropping a pebble in water and the wave moves out in a circle, actually in a sphere from those kinds of antennas. But 5G involves focused beams. And high frequency millimeter waves were previously used by the US military. They gave them up, but now they're concerned that some of these 5G installations are going to interfere with military radar and weapons. It's interesting to note that 95 gigahertz, which is the top band of 5G, which I don't know that they've rolled out here in the US yet, but when they get to it, it's the frequency the military used for crowd dispersal. If they beam that at a crowd, let's say they want to stop a riot or a protest, people would run because it activates the nerves in the skin, makes it feel like your skin is on fire, and crowds will disperse. So that's 95 gigahertz. Now, you can't go out and buy a meter that will measure this unless you've got $100,000 sitting around because only military grade instruments can measure the millimeter waves. There's no consumer grade meter, but my laboratory is working on developing one. And because we really feel the people's meter is an important need, you need to measure what you've got in order to know where to move or what to do to lower your exposure. So here's a slide showing the distinction between broadcasting, which is wide angle, standard antennas, the old fashioned ones, including also 4G, and the phased array antenna of 5G, these narrow pencil beams. They're not laser, but they're about as thick as a pencil, and they would move out directly from the antenna to the user, and they're going to be flittering around everywhere. And I always say this is very hard for living things to adapt to because there's nothing constant about it. It's not like turning on a switch like a light in a room and your eyes grow adapted. But if I stood at a light switch and I flipped it on and off and on and off, in some random way, you wouldn't like it very much. You would tell me, stop, either turn it on or turn it off. You can't stand this kind of random bombardment with radiation. But that's what 4G does to some extent, and 5G will do even worse. It will bombard us with, it might even be microsecond beams coming through our bodies and into our environments and into our devices that we're holding. And no living thing can adapt to this sort of signal that goes on, off, all the time. So here is actually some data from, or maybe it's simulated, but it shows how it's going to go from the antenna to the user through this narrow pencil, but there will be side lobes. So people all around an antenna will be getting hit with lesser amounts of radiation from these so-called phased arrays, the 5G antennas. In this chart, I want to show you what was natural background, and the engineers use a unit called decibels, dBm, and we started out with nothing. Nature doesn't give us any microwaves or millimeter waves. There's nothing coming from the sun that reaches the earth. So it's hugely, this is logarithmic, so it's like 10 to the minus 115. It's essentially zero. And where are we today? Walking in the city of San Francisco, not even in a building, but just through the streets, I measure minus 35 decibels. We have such an anomaly. So that's going up from, say, if nature is a factor of 1, up to 35 decibels is a factor of 100 million times above nature, above the natural background. It's unbelievable. And you get into offices and rooms, you could well be in these extreme anomalies where you're billions of times above background. The limit for the United States and Canada is up here, and it's based on tissue heating, and you see it's in the trillion range. It's 3 trillion times above nature. But other countries like China, Russia, and Switzerland have much more user-friendly standards, much less exposure. Ours are among the highest exposures in the world. And what is this based on? It's based on tissue heating, because right above that level, you start to cook your tissue. And the industry has decided that tissue heating is unsafe, but anything that doesn't heat your tissue is okay. But that's not what Russia has researched, or Switzerland or China. They have looked at non-thermal effects, and they have said, whoa, hold on, there are non-thermal effects. We've got to set our threshold for ceiling exposure much lower than tissue heating. So that's where we are in the US and Canada. It's not good. By the way, our devices work fine over in these countries. I've been over in Switzerland. My cell phone worked just as well with lower levels of radiation. So it's not a matter of dose, it's a matter of choice by the FCC. So here's the electromagnetic spectrum. These are all the radiant electromagnetic waves that science has elucidated, from extremely long waves that are low frequency or long wavelengths, like Earth's Schumann resonance, and the power line is 60 hertz. And then we go up. Hertz is a unit of how many waves per second. So 60 waves per second is the power line. And then we get into the radio waves here, kilohertz and megahertz. And, you know, people said, well, radios have been around for a long time, but we didn't have actively emitting radios. We had radios that received energy from antennas, except for the ham radio operators. They were the only ones with active radios in their immediate vicinity, or people who worked in radar. And it's been well known, radio sickness has been known a long time. I'll say some words about it since radio waves were discovered and used in radar. So the microwave region is just above the common AM and FM radio, and just above that are the millimeter waves. That's 5G, and above that is the terahertz. That's that device in the airport where they ask you to pass through, and they take this kind of picture of you naked through your clothes looking for weapons, but they can only see certain things and some things will pass right through. So, and then infrared, we emit a lot of infrared and onto visible light and ultraviolet, etc. So we're talking about what's called the non-ionizing region of the spectrum. And starting with about visible light and onward is the ionizing region of the spectrum, which means that electrons can be kicked out of atoms. So it was considered that electrons couldn't be kicked out of atoms in this region. So they said the only thing here is tissue heating. But that's science that's 70 or 80 years old. It's not looking at the latest stuff. And by the way, the FCC made a decision that they won't change the 30-year-old standards that they set for 3G and 4G. They're just going to keep the same standards. They're not re-reviewing the literature. So remember, we're analog beings and we're used to analog signals like sunlight and moonlight and natural fields from the earth. But with wireless, we have fields that are digital and pulsed. Analog are always continuous waves. Waves coming from the sun are like sinusoidal waves of various intensities. And this is how the solar spectrum looks that reaches the surface of the earth. And life evolved with analog and continuous waves. But with digital waves, they're pulsed on and off, just like ones and zeros in a computer. A one would mean it's on, a zero means it's off. And you have a sequence of digits, 110, 1010, and then the wave corresponds, it goes on and off according to the digit. And so that's what digital means. And then they have all kinds of pulse modulations as well that they've added to it. So here we are with radio wave spectrum, a totally artificial field to which life never evolved, and increasingly so bathing the Earth. Now, this just gives you an idea. I just want you to get a visual impression here of how much the United States has already utilized the radio frequency spectrum. This is just the lower end of it. And all these applications in different colors are radar and military and other communication bandwidths for various applications. And here's a continuation of the radio frequency spectrum. And here's a blow up of just the 5G allocations. The red bars are the 5G bands. And so the military had to give up most of this from the radar and weaponry to the civilian sector in order that we could have 5G. But now they're concerned about it because it's seemingly interfering with stuff at the Pentagon. So let's talk about cell phones. It really is the major source of uh, personal communication. It really makes me cringe when I see young children like this plastering smartphones or other cell phones right to their head, and even potty trainers that have wireless screens and get children to multitask while they're learning to use a potty. They're fiddling with the screen, believe it or not, right in front of them. And wherever you go, children seem mesmerized by these screens and they know that they can move them with their hands. So it may be nice that Junior can talk to grandma, but not like this. It's just inappropriate, and you'll see why in a moment. And I see people, well, sometimes like this, but also with a lot of Bluetooth devices. And recently I had a client, he was almost 90 years old, and he had a hearing aid, which is now common for the elderly, to be operating on Bluetooth and controlled by his cell phone. And he also boasted that his Tesla vehicle is also turned on and off by his cell phone. And his blood didn't look too good. I'll say some words about that later. So we have 7 billion cell phones. That's almost one per person worldwide. This is an enormous revolution in communication, but it has its side effects, unfortunately. And lots of people don't know about this. So what happens when you put a cell phone to your head? And cell phones are microwaves so far. They're 4G and some 3G perhaps. So microwaves it's an active emitter. It's also coming from the base station or the antenna as well. But your phone is an emitter and it's blasting your brain. And 5-year-olds who have a very thin skull, it's about a half a millimeter thick, have much greater penetration of microwaves deep into the brain compared to a 10-year-old child with a skull about 1 millimeter thick and an adult with a skull that's about 2 millimeters in thickness. And we also know from numerous studies in biology and medicine that any developing organism, this has been shown from rodents to worms to any critter that I know of, any developing organism, of which children are among them, are more sensitive to radiation. And here we are. These children are using wireless devices. Often they go off to school with a tablet or a laptop computer and a smartphone or other phone. And so they're bathed in wireless when they have brains, nervous systems that are exquisitely sensitive. Not only that, gonads that are sensitive, and all their organs are developing. So we do see heating from cell phone exposure, despite the fact that they say the frequencies are not causing tissue heating. I think it may be from the battery itself, but we know that the longer you hold the cell phone to your head, thermography does reveal heating. And we see also some new kinds of tumors that never were known before cell phones, and that is acoustic neuromas, tumors right near this region, probably a direct result from holding the cell phone near the head. So beyond tissue heating, wireless can also damage the brain by opening something called the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is a natural membrane that prevents certain chemicals that we don't want in the brain now from getting in, because this is disrupted by wireless. And so you can think about the epidemic we have of glyphosate, of Roundup, which has been used as an herbicide for now decades. And of course, Monsanto conveniently merged with Bayer, so it can't be sued anymore. Monsanto doesn't exist. That's how they do it. But glyphosate could get into the brain when it couldn't get in before. So some of these things can act synergistically. And I know there are activists who talk just about toxins, and there are other activists who talk just about wireless. The two worlds need to come together because these toxins are synergistic in their action on us. So here's an example of how chemical toxins can get in the brain and cause damage. And we also see that with vaccinations as well, because of mercury and adjuvants, pro-inflammatory chemicals in vaccines, and the vaccine schedule being about 70 vaccines, and children now using wireless. It very much concerns me as a possible role for autism, ADD, and other neurological problems. So we also have no safety standards. We only have what are called guidelines. The world never talks about safety standards in wireless because it's impossible to have them. They're not safe. And by the way, there's no insurance company that will insure the safety of a wireless device. Not one. Because the industry knows well that there are health problems from these things. This is one reason the Telecom Wireless Act of 1996 was probably pushed by lobbyists in the industry. They knew that they would have problems if they didn't cover their behinds by saying you can't clamor about health. It's whatever the FCC decides is the regulation. That's our guideline, and no problem. So, Dr. Barry Trower is an ex military intelligence agent from the UK. That's Trower. If you're interested in his view on this, is really quite revealing, because he worked with microwaves as a weapon in British intelligence for decades. He's now retired, but he says it's impossible to talk about safety standards. You'd have to ask what age, whether they're pregnant or not, how many years of exposure, what's their dosage over the years, because these doses are cumulative, just like the ionizing radiation doses are cumulative. In other words, X-rays and things like that. You wouldn't go in for X-rays without, let's say, protecting your thyroid at the dental office with a lead device, a lead collar. because they know that these dosages are cumulative, and that's why they don't do x-rays of the lungs so often. So, yet we are not wearing dosimeters, so we don't have a clue about our dosage. And one thing I can tell you from the people I know who are electrosensitive or have electrohypersensitivity syndrome, as it's sometimes called, EHS, they've had a whopping exposure to wireless, and then they became hypersensitive. All of them have this story of whether it was near an antenna or whether they use their cell phone extensively in their place of work and at home. They all have a tale about a lot of exposure and then getting exquisitely sensitive and dysfunctional around wireless. And as I said earlier, it's really impossible to adapt to these pulsed and transient digital signals. No living system can adapt to these kinds of signals. You have to ask yourself, how are the cell phones, the smartphones, which is our greatest source of exposure, how do we use them? How do we carry them? In the case of the man, almost 90, with his brand new hearing aid that operated on Bluetooth, he had to carry it in his pants pocket. He was constantly adjusting the volume with his cell phone, which he found convenient, but on the other hand, debilitating to him as well. And we don't know the long-term exposure effects. A lot of people say, well, let's do a study on 5G. Why isn't the industry funded any? And I think it was Senator Blumenthal, I'm not sure what state he's from, but he held a hearing in the Senate about, and he asked the industry point blank, I watched the video online, what studies have you done? And they claimed they did none. It was an embarrassment almost. They did none. But if you think about it, how can you do a study to look at long-term effects if you're going to terraform the Earth with 5G? If you're going to change every square inch of planet Earth to give it the wireless World Wide Web with intensification of 4G and now 5G and the 42,000 satellites, how can you test for safety in that case? Because you'll have nothing to compare it to. And again, it will be like that till the end of time. And we don't have studies that go on like that in science. We usually have short term studies and longitudinal studies, maybe 6 months to a year. But beyond that, we don't know what long term exposure effects there will be. So Barry Trower points out clearly that this is a very complex question of what would be safety for one person would not be safe for another, and that the elderly and the youth and the children and the unborns are the most at risk. And there is no consensus on this. And yet we see this picture. I've seen pregnant women even balance their tablets on their big abdomens, and very young children given wireless screens like pacifiers. And I'm very concerned about this, or cell phones to the head. All of these things really should be reconsidered. They're not toys. So here's the official view on exposure. As I said, the telecom industry has essentially controlled the FCC because it's a revolving door between industrial representatives and the FCC itself. And they have set this limit, which is about tissue heating in the United States. How do they measure this SAR, specific absorption rate? They have this mannequin. It looks like a head and shoulders of a mannequin, and it's hollow and filled with salt water, like physiological saline. And then they strap a cell phone to the head region, and they put a thermometer inside what would be the head of this mannequin. They're looking for tissue heating, and that's how they decide what's safe, and how they arrived at 1.6 watts per kilogram of tissue. And right now, the FCC decided to maintain this level for 5G. They're not going to re-review it. We do not look at non-thermal effects, which means other than heating of tissue effects in the US. But the Russian guidelines are 100 times lower than the US. The Austrian guidelines are 1,000 times lower than the US. And China too. We brought a meter to China. The same meter that I walked the streets of San Francisco, I walked the streets of Beijing. And Beijing has a lot more density in terms of high risers and density of people. Yet I found lower ambient dosages walking around on the streets of Beijing than I do in San Francisco, much to my amazement. So China too has lower guidelines for exposure. And as I said earlier, the US insurance company do not insure any cell phone providers or companies due to health risks. So what are the health risks that go beyond thermal? These are called the non-thermal effects, and there's a range of biological effects from changes at the level of a single gene all the way up to behavior and performance of humans. So damage to DNA, breaks in the DNA, mutations, altered gene expression, that means what RNA gets expressed, what proteins get made, so basic function throughout the cell, many different types of genes, reduced sperm count and fertility, uh, something young men have to worry about. And I remember seeing a lot of young men, and they carry the cell phone right near their gonads and their pants pocket in the front. And I said to one, I said, you plan on having some progeny in the future? I said, it's really not a safe or a healthy idea to put that where you got it. He says, well, if I don't carry this thing here, I'm not going to get the girlfriend that I'm going to need for the future proliferation. So again, the youth feel invincible. So, but it's certainly true, and one can see it readily under a microscope. Not only count, but movement of sperm is affected, so fertility goes down. There's been detrimental effects on fetal development, especially of in rodents that are models for humans, and neurological changes, including brain degeneration and cognitive impairment, learning and memory deficits. Even in people who say, I don't have a problem from cell phone, there's been studies where they were exposed to cell phones as if they were just holding the phone and using it, and their memory was tested with a string of words or digits, and then they were put in a Faraday cage so all radiation was blocked, and their memory was improved. So it showed that even those of us who say, I don't have a problem from this stuff, we have already problems with memory and we don't even know about. Oxidative stress and death of cells. So free radical chemistry is upset, despite the fact that we call this non-ionizing radiation. It is engaging in ionization by other pathways. Cardiovascular disease is one consequence. Metabolic and immune system disruption, eye and skin damage, and it's categorized by the WHO, the World Health Organization, as a class 2B human carcinogen. Now that's not very high on the list, but it's been argued that that category should be moved up because of brain cancers known as gliomas. This is a type of brain cancer that is often fatal because it's could be very deep in the brain and inoperable and have fast growing. And as I mentioned earlier, the acoustic neuroma. And even cancer of the heart has been seen when that was a disease unknown before the smart meter. So one mechanism by which microwaves damage our bodies was given voice to by Dr. Martin Paul. He's a retired biochemist, physiologist from University of Oregon, and he's got a lot of material. If you just Google his name, he gives free ebooks and a lot of free papers on his website. It's PALL, and he talks about how it targets the cell membrane. Now, every cell has a membrane. That's sort of the outer boundary of the cell, and this membrane decides what can get into the cell and out of the cell. And calcium is highly restricted by something called a voltage-gated calcium channel on the cell membrane. So microwaves are disrupting these channels, allowing a lot of calcium to enter at higher levels than normal. And you might say, well, what's the big deal about calcium? But calcium is an important messenger in a sequence of many biochemical pathways in the body, and it can change the course of numerous pathways. And that's probably one way in which we get this slew of effects from microwaves, from the level of the gene all the way up to behavior and performance. So you can look for his publications. They're pretty exciting. So electrosensitivity, I'd be interested to hear from any of you who are electrosensitive or who think you are. Already back almost 10 years ago, the WHO, the World Health Organization, told us then that 3 to 6% of the world population was electrosensitive or electrohypersensitive. That means that they had symptoms in the presence of wireless. They may also have symptoms from 60 hertz or power lines or other things. It's a general term, electrosensitivity, but it really went up dramatically during the introduction of wireless. I can tell you I had a slew of clients when smart meters were installed in California about 8 years ago. Uh, People coming to me left and right desperate. They couldn't sleep, couldn't sit in their homes anymore with pains, with headaches, with anxiety and irritability and other sleep disorders, restlessness, brain fog, difficulty concentrating, memory problems, tinnitus or ringing in the ears, heart palpitations and arrhythmias, depression, fatigue. Those are some of the symptoms. You don't have to have all of these symptoms to have it. I never thought of myself as electrosensitive, but I was getting some heart arrhythmias or palpitations the longer I sat at a computer that I had, a desktop. And then I began to think about it and realized both my keyboard and my mouse were wireless. What was I doing to myself? Because the computer came that way when I bought it. That's kind of the state of the art to today. Everything is the glorification of wireless technology all over the place, whether you need it or not. Who needs it in a desktop computer? So I replaced it with a corded keyboard and a corded mouse, and presto, my heart palpitations went away. So I too suffered some of this. So I think a lot of us have symptoms, but many people don't connect it. Doctors don't realize that these things can come from overexposure to wireless, and they simply would prescribe a medication as a result. They wouldn't go to the cause, which is unfortunate because lots of people are on multiple medications, and that's not healthy either. Radio sickness has been known a long time. This is from a website, StetzerElectric.com, that sells certain Stetzer filters. And this is from the U.S. Naval Medical Research Institute. It was declassified in 1972. But they knew back then that big radio communications and radar communications, the men and women who served in the military near those installations got a slew of symptoms. And I once talked to also a man who climbs telephone poles who exposes his brain near some of these antennas, and he told me, you know, he's going up where it's considered safe, but when he comes down, he can't think straight for the next 3 days, and then some. And we wonder if he's ever returning to normal from the exposure being near these installations. This is an interesting study. It's a large study. It was on over 100,000 millennials, people born between 1980 and 2000. And they were really the first generation to grow up using wireless in their youths. And this was published and done by Blue Cross Blue Shield, a big HMO. They already saw a sharp decline in their health starting at age 27, and health conditions such as depression, hyperactivity, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension. And all these things are just going up steeply in just a few years from 2014 to 2017. You wouldn't expect this in a group of youngsters. And ages 34 to 36 had 21% more cardiovascular conditions and 15% more endocrine disorders in 2017 than in 2014. Now, it's certainly not the only factor of our times, but they are more heavily users of wireless devices than the older generation, and we can certainly guess that this is a causal factor. And there's also glyphosate. There's also more fast food and lifestyle changes, etc., with changing generations. But by and large, Blue Cross Blue Shield pointed out that this is by far the sickest generation that we've seen that's under study in for 4 or 5 generations, and that's a very sad thing. I'm not blaming this generation. It's, I think, circumstantial and they don't know how bad wireless is, in the same way that people in the 1950s and 1940s smoked, thinking they were doing the right thing for their health. Whoops, excuse me a minute. So I want to tell you about my study on 4G. I did a study and I asked this research question: is the blood affected by short-term exposure to a smartphone? They were all 4G LTE, which is still the current thing. And this was my study design. And it was funded by the Weston A. Price Foundation, which is a nonprofit foundation out of Washington, D.C., that is advancing the ideas of a dentist, Weston A. Price, who looked at the American diet and problems with our teeth and said we need to get back to the diet of our ancestors. So in my study, largely people were eating this very healthy diet, which consisted of grass-fed animal meat, wild fish, raw milk, raw cheeses, limited grains, and totally organic vegetables and fruits, and no industrial grade oils in the diet, natural butter, raw butter, and olive oil, unfiltered, and extra virgin, and coconut oil. So it's a good diet, I think. The blood of these people looked good in the start. I had to choose a healthy diet in order to get healthy blood at the baseline, and I knew from numerous studies I did on diets that that diet would give me a good blood picture, because I'm looking at the blood under the microscope. I used a single smartphone, and so I looked at the blood taken from the fingertip or toes at baseline. Then, after the person wore it 45 minutes in a backpack in the turned on condition, but it did not ring, it did not receive a text or phone call during that time. And then I looked at the blood after that so called carrying condition. And then they worked with the cell phone, holding it in the hands for an additional 45 minutes and made 2 5-minute phone calls, holding the phone near their head, but not necessarily touching the ear. So that was the study, and I photographed the blood under the microscope. And my microscope is dark field live blood analysis. And here are people using the finger pricker. And this is how healthy blood looks under the microscope. Under dark field, the blood is side lit, and you see the nice rounded uniform red blood cells spread out, not sticky. This is a white blood cell in the center here, moving toward 2 o'clock, caught in the act of motion. And I see a little bit of platelet aggregates, but this is in the blood of somebody who's almost 70 years old. This is perfect blood, really, for someone that age. So now I'll show you what happened in the study. I'll just show you a few examples and then generalize the data. So here's a 75-year-old female at baseline, the blood, a little bit of stickiness, but not too bad. After carrying the cell phone 45 minutes, the cells are all stuck together in what we call rouleau. That word is a French word meaning rolls, like looking at a roll of coins on an edge, like a roll of nickels, and seeing the edges of the red blood cell, and these are all like in a snake configuration. And when you have blood like this, it cannot travel through the tiny microcapillaries that require red blood cells to hunker down and go single cell at a time, because the capillaries have a smaller diameter even than red blood cells. So blood like this doesn't get through. And in some cases, I also looked at toe blood to be sure I wasn't looking at some artifacts only in the hands. And after using the phone 45 minutes, the rouleau in this case broke apart. You can see the membranes have distortion. They're spiky, and these are the spikes sticking out of the plane of the microscope. These are called echinocytes, after the animal echinoderm or sea urchin. The cells are now like balled up like a sea urchin with spikes. That's another type of cell that doesn't travel very well through the capillaries. So here's another example, a male 55 years old, baseline, blood looks good, carrying condition, blood got sticky, and he had 100% echinocytes after using the phone. Everybody reacted a little bit differently, but 9 out of 10 showed not a good blood response, showed unhealthy blood changes following cell phone exposure. And what first happens is an aggregation of the cells, and upon further exposure, the aggregates break down somewhat and the cells change shape. The membranes are distorted and spiky. So I published this article in the Weston A. Price Foundation journal. You can find it online and read it at westonaprice.org. And if you just look for cell phone radiation blood study, you'll get it readily. So let's take a look at rouleau. So here's a micro photograph. I didn't make it, but it's from slideplayer.com. Red blood cells must pass single file through capillaries. Capillary walls are thin and permeable to gases, nutrients, and this is how the blood does its work of bringing oxygen, taking away wastes, bringing food in, and the exchange of toxins, waste is all done in the microcapillaries. But if the cells, red blood cells, are stuck together, as I showed you, or spiky, then they can't readily travel through some of these tiny capillaries. And then we have compromised circulation all over the body. And also, it's apparent to me that the red blood cells, which naturally have a net negative charge, which we call the zeta potential, have lost their charges because now normally like charges repel in electricity, but here they're all stuck together. So the cells have lost their charges due to radiation exposure. So we go from highly dispersed, healthy red blood cells to strongly aggregated, where blood viscosity goes up, and this is the beginning of clotting. This kind of aggregation of red blood cells is one of the first stages of blood clotting, and also high viscosity blood. And keep that in mind when we talk about COVID-19 toward the end, because that's what's going on with 4G, 5G. So we have rouleau in the blood and sticky blood. Capillary blood flow is compromised, and some 85% of our body depends on capillary blood flow. And if we reduce that by constant exposure to radiation from cell phones and 5G, we will reduce the oxygen delivery to all of our cells, and misspelling here, metabolites and toxins will be accumulating as well, and we won't be bringing nutrients in. So chronic exposure leads to clotting, strokes, and heart disease. We would expect that. And we do see this, especially in the elderly. I have to tell you, I have a lot of clients who have over the years carried their cell phones on the body, and these are people over 50, and people have had clots in the body as a result. Now, I'm not saying it's the only thing, because as one ages, there is a tendency for the blood to get stickier, and with a poor diet as well, there's a tendency, but it is a causal factor in cardiovascular disorders. Now, I want to show you what happens to the biofield. And the other day I gave you a keynote where I talked about the natural energy of life and within us and just outside the body. The biofield is probably one of the important regulators of our lives and a biocommunicator between humans. And that I could measure it with something called BioWell. Here's the electromagnetic field of a person who worked 1 hour at the computer exposed to Wi-Fi. Initial state, her biofield looks pretty good. She complained. She came to see me because she said, you know, I can't use this technology anymore. I'm really not feeling well. And 1 hour of computer work in my laboratory really disrupted her body, her biofield, as you can see. Left-right asymmetry, breaks and gaps, distortions. So she's a known electrohypersensitive person. What happens when a person who says, I'm not electrohypersensitive, also gets exposed to wireless? So this is the biofield initially, and this is after 30 minutes of wireless radiation exposure. This is a person who says, I don't have a problem. I can talk on the cell phone all day. I don't have any symptoms, but look at the quality of the biofield. This could be analyzed quantitatively as well, and I'm just showing you the pretty pictures here. But this is the smooth, unimpeded flow of chi is what we want to see in the biofield. We want to see no gaps, regularity, left to right balance, What do we see here? Spikiness, some gaps, a quality of spikiness all the way around. Looks prickly. And in the software analysis, that's associated with stress and anxiety. Even if they don't feel it, lots of people don't feel the level of stress that their autonomic nervous system is experiencing because it's become chronic to the point where, who, me? I'm not stressed. And then, I had a man who worked for Homeland Security come in, and I measured heart rate variability, and some of his values were about 500% over normal. When he said, "I'm not stressed," but he was terribly stressed. It was scary, the level of stress that some people carry around and don't feel it because it's become the habit of their physiology. So this is something we have to keep in mind. It's sort of like blood pressure. You don't feel it if it's elevated, but you will suffer the consequences over time. And what about the environment? We know that there are other studies, I didn't do them, but people study what happens to plants. Even tomato plants exposed to a cell phone show stress related biochemicals inside the plant when analyzed in a laboratory. And we see collapse in insect population and the pollinators. Anybody who's a gardener like me notices bee behavior is really strange. Bees are missing flowers, and I see them do very strange things. Sometimes just sitting on the ground, they're not well. It's a combination of agrochemicals and 4G, 5G, and now we can expect worse because animal orientation as well as navigation is affected by antennas. And we've heard about birds falling out of the skies in places like the Netherlands where they turned on 5G. People reported on that too. So animals that rely on navigation and orientation, like birds and bees, that are very important to our ecology, may be totally thwarted by the rise in 4G, 5G. Now, another interesting thing is that microbes, some of the worst, like the staphylococcus resistant, uh, what is it called? MRSA, the multiple resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA bacteria that's sometimes you catch in hospitals. Uh, these organisms, which are really hard to manage because they've been maimed by antibiotics, seem to proliferate when presented with 4G, 5G, at least in laboratory studies. So some of the unnatural microbes that we don't really want around will throw off microwave ecology as well. And microwave ecology is incredibly important to the entire Earth. So I'm not the only scientist concerned about these things. There's a growing health and environmental movement. In fact, on the very day, I believe it was January 20th or 28th, when the WHO announced that there was a serious problem in China with this coronavirus seeming pandemic. It wasn't yet a pandemic, but they called it a serious health crisis in China. They warned us that it might spread. And that was on the very day of a global protest about 5G deployment. But that got absolutely zero news because all the news is preoccupied with the coronavirus development in China. And here's one website where you can sign an appeal, a 5G appeal. It's .eu, but it's really worldwide. And it's launched by a number of scientists, but signed by a lot of people. Some places like Brussels have put a moratorium on 5G. That means halting it. Certain cantons in Switzerland, parts of Rome and Germany, small regions of the world, Slovenia, another country that's slowing down. It's not going to roll it out yet. It's going to wait and see what goes on elsewhere, which is a good idea. And some municipalities and organizations have made lawsuits against the federal government. They want to stop 5G. They want environmental safety review and reports. Santa Fe Alliance for Public Health and Safety is one of them. And a number of cities around the United States have sued the federal government over health jurisdiction and environmental issues. The ones that I know in California that are near me, in the San Francisco Bay Area, Mill Valley, California, Danville, San Jose, which is interestingly in Silicon Valley. Uh, and there are others around the country. But I don't know where those lawsuits are going. I know they can drag out. And the problem is, if you win a lawsuit against the federal government, you don't win any money. So how do you pay these lawyers who are going to do the dirty work to fight these lawsuits? It's problematic raising the funding. Here is an international appeal to stop 5G on Earth and in space, the 5gspaceappeal.org. It's a very a good organization where you can sign on right online. You don't have to pay any money. And I looked there in November, and there were a lot of signatures. You can add your signature. You don't have to be a scientist or engineer or healthcare worker. Right now, they're taking all the signatures they can get. Now, lots of people have wondered about 5G, and these are some extreme views. Just a minute, I'm going to have a sip here. There are some extreme views on 5G that you can find online. And it doesn't matter what I think. I just want to tell you about these because they do exist, and you may wonder. One of them is that this is all about total surveillance. I certainly think that's so, by the way, because with 5G, you're going to have an Internet of Things. Everything is going to be hooked to the Internet, your car, your everything, appliances, and things you don't even believe would be hooked up. Maybe clothing that you purchase is going to be hooked up. So they're going to know where everything is at all times and what you're doing with it. If that isn't total surveillance, I don't know what is. So that's one view. Some other views, artificial intelligence takeover. Well, I don't know how conscious artificial intelligence is that they could reach out and try to take over the planet. But what do I know about this? I know Stephen Hawking warned us about AI before he left this plane. He said AI could spell the end of the human race, and even Elon Musk had some dire things to say about 4G and 5G. But then he seemed to change his mind enormously as he's busily launching a lot of the satellites through his SpaceX corporation. Some people think it's part of a depopulation agenda, and there's a website on that, 5G depopulation game plan. You can look it up and watch videos on this, and maybe they don't exist anymore. I don't know. There's been a lot of censorship going on, Google and YouTube and Facebook with respect to 5G in recent weeks. That I can tell you. Some people are targeted individuals. What does that mean? They think that there's some kind of energy weapon beamed at them, and they have a lot of health symptoms that are really dire, and they're desperate. And I don't know what to make of these folks. I have had a lot of them contact me over decades from all over the world, and I cannot do anything to help them. It's quite possible that there is such a weapon system, but there are other nonprofits that handle this kind of thing. And all I know is that we have to be concerned that some of the 5G frequencies were from weapons that the military had used. So one wonders. And yes, indeed, the directed energy weapon, especially the 95 gigahertz, the uppermost band of 5G, could control some of the protests and riots that we had recently. Now, they didn't use that. They were using rubber bullets and, I guess, gas and things, tear gas. So I didn't hear about any energy weapons, not yet. And there's an interesting documentary that you can watch. It's free and online called 5G Apocalypse, the Extinction Event. That really is probably the most dire possible consequence of 5G. But beyond 5G, they're also planning 6G, and you may wonder what is that? That's the direct implantation into your body of devices that control and react to wireless. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about this question. Is there a possible connection between 5G and the COVID-19 pandemic? And by the way, if you were to Google 5G and COVID-19 or pandemic, what will come up is all conspiracy theory, and it will. No one's allowed to talk about this in any sensible way. In other words, For some strange reason, we have a pandemic, but we're not allowed to ask the question, are there contributing causal factors besides a virus that may have contributed to it? Because right away there were a few people that said, oh, there's no virus, it's all 5G, and that's that. I don't agree with that view, but there's a few people talking like that. But I do think when we have something as widespread as a pandemic, we ought to sit down and use critical thinking and talk about the possible factors that may have contributed to it besides a virus. And yet, it's not permitted. This is being censored on our social media, and that very much concerns me as somebody who's a truth seeker. Now, this is something I formed this little chart after reading Arthur Furstenberg's book, and I recommend it. It's a book called The Invisible Rainbow. Arthur Furstenberg is, although in his book seems to believe and put forward the idea that the major pandemics have always coincided with the introduction of a new or proliferation of a new technology that really affects the Earth's energy field. He doesn't even believe in a virus then. He's basically saying that this is all about power changing the Earth's energy field, and then you get this seeming influenza kind of thing. And by the way, the word influenza comes from the big unknown. You know, what influenced you to get it? Because nobody really understood it. And it wasn't strictly contagious because they took, somebody did experiments where they took sputum from people with, let's say, the flu, a known flu, not COVID, but, and they would, volunteers would then allow the sputum to be put into their mouths or noses, and they didn't get sick. So it's clearly not just about a virus. I mean, people have resistances. I think there are viruses. I'm not a virus denier, but I just want to point out, and this material is in his book, not in this format, but he wrote the book before COVID too. So 1890, we had a Russian flu, supposedly 1 million deaths. That was about the year when the Earth got electrified. Power lines started going in. 1918 was the big epidemic that coincided with World War II and poor sanitation, but there was also a flu. Now we can say at least three factors: a virus, poor sanitation, and a world war, which will knock your immune system, I think. And there were 500 million cases. That was 1/3 of the world's population in 1918, and 50 million deaths. Some estimates are even higher. So that affected, I mean, 1/3 of the world actually got sick, and 50 million deaths. That's huge. And there's been lesser ones. 1957 associated with big radar that came during the Cold War, and the Asian flu H2N2, and 2 million deaths worldwide. 1968, the introduction of military satellites and their proliferation, and Hong Kong flu, as it's called, H3N2, 3 to 4 million deaths. And now we can call it the Wuhan coronavirus or COVID-19, the new name. And I looked up the figures today on online, and we've had 7,575,874 cases as of today, and 422,847 deaths. So it doesn't match anything of these prior pandemics, but of course we're still in the midst of it. It's not over yet, and we can expect future waves of pandemic, just as these other pandemics, 1918 had two or three waves of lesser magnitude than the first wave of the disease. So what do we know about COVID? I'm going to tell you, I've looked into this more deeply than the conventional media, because I'm not sure they're going to tell you this. There are science papers. One was done by a very prominent group of retrovirologists in India, and they showed that this virus, the sequence of it is not naturally occurring. In other words, it has the mark of being put together by recombinant DNA technology. And they say there's elements of a coronavirus, which, by the way, is a virus that causes the common cold, and the SARS virus, the sudden acute respiratory syndrome that goes back to about 2003, a known coronavirus that caused respiratory disease in persons, humans, and then HIV, parts of HIV. So it's a chimera or a hybrid. And with that, they said this would, the probability of this ever happening in nature is just way too small. This was man made. Now, further searching on my part shows that there were laboratory at the University of California, Chapel Hill, was working on coronaviruses of this sort, and under the Obama administration around 2015, and it was funded by NIH for a while, there were also Chinese researchers brought over because some of these viruses started in bats and were found in China. And I think they were part of the group in North Carolina. And they were receiving funding by the NIH. And it got to the point where it was now considered too dangerous to continue the work in the United States. A moratorium had been called. But Anthony Fauci, who has been head of the National Institute for Infectious Disease and Allergy since 40 years, I think, he continued giving funds to the Wuhan laboratory to further develop this virus in ways that we call gain of function. That means to make it more virulent. And that's what was going on in China, in Wuhan, apparently at this Wuhan virus facility, which was very close to the market where they believe the first case broke out. And this was all funded by NIH. Now, I found evidence of this on the NIH website. I'm not making this up. I'm not listening to videos. It's there. And the funding was ceased to Wuhan laboratory in December 2019. So they stopped the funding. They probably heard that something leaked out, and whether it was purposeful or whether it was accidental, we don't know. It's horrific. And this virus causes numerous problems. Again, being a chimera, it's hitting at multiple levels. It's mainly a blood and immune system disease, but it can have respiratory consequences. Initially, they thought it was causing pneumonia, and they were looking at x-rays, but really what they were looking at was a late stage of the disease where a kind of mucus shows up in the lung as a last resort. It's the lung's response to inflammation. This virus causes hypercoagulation of the blood in the lungs and in other organs. And in the worst cases, you get a cytokine storm. That's the cases in which some people go on to pass away. They have a hyperimmune response, a hyperinflammatory response, and a hypercoagulation. And they just can't be saved. They're literally, their immune systems are now turned against themselves, and some of them go on to die. And so the ventilators were not really a good idea. This was not a conventional pneumonia. It was not a viral pneumonia. It was actually working more at the level of the blood and disrupting the immune system, as you might expect an HIV type virus to do. Let's see, where am I here? So, I'm losing my thing here. Okay, so I want to tell you about a study done and written in Spanish. It was Spanish researchers took a look at the incidence of COVID-19 worldwide, especially the initial outbreaks over the first 2 months or so, and where 5G had already been deployed, especially heavy deployments, as in Wuhan. And they actually showed a direct correlation between 5G network deployment and coronavirus outbreaks of the highest number. And for example, Wuhan is 100% 5G installed as of October 31st, 2019, according to the Chinese. But they even looked in cities where 5G was installed in a certain region of the city, and then there was a boundary, and then no 5G over here. And they found the disease incidence was higher where the 5G had been installed in the very regions of particular cities So this is a very detailed study in terms of the epidemiology, and it's 50 pages long, the English translation. You can find it on this website, radiationdangers.com, 5G study. If you just Google that, I think you'll get it. And there you can read it in English. Somebody translated it. It's very impressive. The probability that this is this is chance, is essentially zero. There is apparently a cofactor of 5G and COVID-19 symptoms and outbreak. And yet we're not allowed to discuss this. And you won't find this paper in general by using the terms to Google 5G and COVID-19. You're not going to find it because it's censored by Google. Even scholar.google.com censors it. You have to put in more of this particular website to get it. And that's very unfortunate when we see this kind of censorship popping up. So these are the three ways I see an implication of 4G and 5G as a possible causal factor in COVID-19, but we're not allowed to talk about it on social media. Number one, in regions with higher 5G deployment, the highest rates of COVID initially. Now COVID is spreading to other places slowly, more slowly, like India and Africa, where they really didn't have any 5G, but still not as strong. Secondly, the hypercoagulation of blood that I showed you from my own experiments. And by the way, Magda Havas, a Canadian researcher, did a similar study, also showing that 4G affects hypercoagulation of blood, stickiness of red blood cells, and early blood clotting. So if we see that with 4G, we would expect it might exacerbate COVID-19 manifestations, particularly in attacks on the blood, because we're talking about the same problem. 4G, in particular 4G and possibly 5G, are going to target the blood, make it sticky, and COVID-19 is doing this independently. And thirdly, both 4G and 5G disrupt the immune system. There's dozens of papers on this. And you can go to bioinitiative.org, and there are scroll down on the main thing, and you will see charts compiled by Dr. Cindy Sage showing dozens of studies that show disruptions of the human immune system as well as animals. And disruptions means, on the one hand, the immune system can be thwarted and may not work, so that you might become more susceptible to a viral infection. On the other hand, sometimes the immune system was hyperstimulated by frequencies. So this might also account for the cytokine storm hyperimmune system response too. So this notion of disruption can work to either hyperactivate the immune system or basically inactivate it. It's a disruption. So those are the three ways in which I see them as possible causal factors. And I think it's unbelievable to me that our leadership on Earth is not having a conversation using critical thinking to think about all the factors involved in a pandemic. I can think, as I told you earlier, of at least three factors for the 1918 pandemic, which was awesome. A world war, men in the trenches with no running water, no toilets, and a virus. And it was a combination of things that promulgated the pandemic aspect of it. We must think more critically. A virus sweeping the world and killing people as the sole factor in a pandemic is ludicrous. There are always multiple factors. Epidemiologists will swear by this. This is what they do for a living. But we're not allowed to discuss this in a sensible way. And we're not allowed to discuss it on social media, which I find really dangerous and scary. That our leadership, or whoever's running the technocracy in which we find ourselves, have made this outside of our grasp. So the last section of what I want to talk about is how to stay healthy in a wireless digital era. What can we do about this? I don't want to leave you hanging thinking you're stuck. There are strategies that you can use to stay healthy. Excuse me a minute, I got to drink some fluid. And one is knowing the levels in your home and workplace and reducing your exposure as much as possible. So there are really four things: measuring the levels in your home, reducing your exposure to wireless whenever possible, using protective measures that are validated, and earthing or getting grounded. And I'll talk about each of them. I do recommend a meter for 1 to 4G. 1G is no longer here, but 3G and 4G are still with us. This Cornet ED 88T Plus is a very good meter, and it's about $180. I'm not selling it. I'm just mentioning it. It's you can measure all kinds of um, RF and other fields with it, and it's reliable. We're developing a meter at our lab, and it might look something like this in the end. We want to see what uh, going beyond 4G up to 90, 95 gigahertz with the different bands might show us. We don't have a prototype like this yet, but we do have a prototype that's working on a computer right now. And we want something for the people that's not $100,000 so they can measure their levels. So in terms of reducing your exposure to wireless, the best way to do this is what we call prudent avoidance. Number one, keep the cell phone at least an inch away from your body. If you were to get a manual with your cell phone, and I doubt you did because they usually don't give you a paper manual, but somewhere tucked away on your smartphone, there is a manual. I've never found mine. But in there, I've heard it said that you need to keep the cell phone at least 1 inch away from your body, and then it's safer. Because if you do touch your body, you're getting a bigger dose than the FCC wants you to get. One thing that I do is keep my cell phone on airplane mode as much as possible, which means I'm not instantly available at the touch of someone trying to call me. But I do turn it on periodically, maybe once every couple of hours, to see who texted, who called, and to return a message. But that way I'm not exposed constantly. And when it's on airplane mode, it's better than being turned off. If you think turning your phone off is really off, it's not off. It's still communicating with the GPS satellite. They know where you are. If you put it on airplane mode, as far as I know from measurements I've made, it is truly off and not emitting any frequencies. So in terms of your communications, if you can use a wired computer rather than a tablet or cell phone, that would be great. That's my choice. And I also have wired Ethernet DSL. I never moved on to Wi-Fi for various reasons. I don't want the exposure, but I don't want the insecurity of it. It's hackable. Anything Wi-Fi is infinitely hackable. They can get in there and they can use your Wi-Fi. They can hack into your network and all of your bank accounts, etc. So give that another thought, whether you really should be handling those accounts in a Wi-Fi environment. Now, besides cell phones and smartphones, there's something called the DECT phone, the digitally enhanced phone that is the wireless landline phone. It is not safe. It emits even more radiation, many of them, than smartphones. So I got rid of all of those and put in wired phones. And you just have more wired phones throughout the house and make long wires so you can carry it around if you want. And then I told you the story of me eliminating my wireless mouse and wireless keyboard. And think wires. We want wires. Wires are safe compared to wireless. There are some protective measures, and I'll talk about some of these that have been scientifically validated by independent scientists, not just the company selling them, and having peer-reviewed reports in the literature, such as protective devices for your environment, shielding. I'll show you some of these. Protective devices for your body. I'll show you some of these. And apps and devices to use with your smartphones. LessEMF.com. Again, it's not my website, it's somebody else's commercial website, but they have a lot of products, and there are other websites as well. That one has a lot of clothing, for example. I know a lot of electrosensitive persons because of my work as a consultant in this area, and many of them say they get relief when they put on clothing. It doesn't totally diminish all their symptoms, but they feel better wearing a special scarf that has silver threads in it that's blocking EMFs, that's sleeping under a kind of silver threaded mosquito netting like this, which is really like a Faraday cage around the bed, or a tent like this, Mylar, which is aluminum coated plastic, is helpful, and caps that also have metallic fiber in them. They don't have to be stiff. They can be quite normal seeming fabrics. I was in China about a year ago and I learned about this, that China has an EMF shielded aprons for pregnant women. I never saw this in the United States, but I then tried to validate whether the government mandated that pregnant women wear it, because that's a great admission that this stuff is harmful to your fetus. But I did not find evidence that the Chinese government mandates the wearing of such a shield. But it would be a good idea if a woman were pregnant or about to get pregnant to wear an apron like this that is basically a Faraday cage around all the major organs and the abdomen in particular. Now, lots of people are selling all kinds of gizmos. They claim it's safe if you plaster this in the backside of your phone or wear this pendant on your chest. I've only studied really 2 pendants in studies that were peer-reviewed and published in journals and done with controls. So these are the 2 pendants, but I have to say I didn't test 5G, only 4G. Only up to 4G and also 60 hertz with sympathetic resonance technology. The Q-Link is a piece of technology that really was born about 25 years ago, so it's even pre-wireless, but it seemed to work to help protect people who feel electrosensitive from 3G, 4G in part, and you wear it at the level of the heart. And it's a subtle energy technology. It's not a battery operated anything, and they keep it proprietary in terms of how it actually works. There's another pendant that I measured, and it's from Hong Kong. It's called a Mezcua Chi Pendant 3, and I also studied it with 4G LTE and found a protective level on the biofield and on electrosensitives. But I know there are others out there, but I'm skeptical because people uh, will say, "Oh, all I have to do is stick the sticker on the backside of my phone, and I can put it anywhere, and my phone is safe now." And I say, "Is there really a peer-reviewed study published by a third party on this application?" And they'll say, "Well, I don't know." And so how can you trust such a claim? You can't. That's hearsay unless there's such a paper published, and especially by an independent scientist who doesn't have a vested interest in the company. Now, here's something that I did a few years ago. I did a study on an app on a phone. Unfortunately, this app no longer exists, but this company is undergoing restructuring. And this was the first case of measuring a frequency broadcast over the internet that could come through your phone or your computer that would be positive and bioactive on heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is a measure of autonomic nervous system balance. And so that has to do with heart waves, in this case, low frequency to high frequency ratio decrease, and the probability was 0.000. And I did sham controls where I was blinded. It was a double-blind study where I was blinded and all the participants in the study was blinded. It was 20 subjects. Admittedly, that's a small study, but it's a pilot study, ages 40 to 75, and all of them showed improved autonomic nervous system balance with reduced stress when exposed to 4G. So this gives me hope that we might be able to in the future add possibly beneficial frequencies to our wireless devices that will neutralize their deleterious effects. So you can read this paper. It's published in JACM, 2017, volume 23, pages 1 to 7. JACM, Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. I'm coming to the end soon, and then we'll have questions. I guess nobody has come up with one yet. Now, protective devices for cell phones, as I said, there's so many of these. Buyer beware. I have not seen peer-reviewed publications on virtually any of them. I looked at a number of them using my blood bioassay, and I found only partial protection. I have not found anything that's 100% protective. What I would like to get are funding is funding, and I am a nonprofit lab, I would like to do some comparative studies of some of these devices on the market. But no single company is going to fund this because they want only their product studied and not compared with others because maybe it won't look as good. So I'm looking for third party funding, philanthropy, or foundation money where I might try to figure out which of these are the best, which are by comparing them in clinical trials. So if you know of any philanthropists or foundations that might fund such a thing, it would be for good humanitarian use. And I do have a nonprofit laboratory. So other protective measures you can take, you can opt out of a smart meter, which is a wireless meter that would be put on your power line instead of an analog meter. In most states, you can opt out of it. You can shield your home using special paint. You can paint the walls of your bedroom or your home office. You can even flip the switch on your electric power every night, and the freezer won't thaw out, not overnight. And you should be especially careful with your children and grandchildren that they should not use wireless. We should be banning Wi Fi in the schools like they did in France. But no, we have, it seems to me, going on in preschool. And there are baby monitors. Most of the American ones are wireless, but in Europe you can get wired baby monitors, I think also sold here. And the last thing that I'll talk about in terms of protection is getting earthing, getting touching the earth once again, because the earth is rich in electrons, and getting grounded by touching the earth, and you probably know this more than anyone as dowsers, being in touch with earth energies is very, very important for our health, but we've moved very far away from it. And there are even special shoes that conduct the meridians in your toes and maybe your also the ball of the foot with the earth to give you that conductivity if you need shoes. And sitting on the ground using earthing products like sheets with silver threads in them that then get grounded to a lightning rod in the soil outside. People claim better sleep, less pain, and reduced stress and improved immune function. And some also say that this might help with EMF stress and electrosensitivity as well. I also think that we're challenged these days to have a very high personal vibration, and by that I mean an enduring positive state of love and joy, a high spiritual state. That in itself may help offset some of the negative health effects of EMFs. But that's my hypothesis. It needs to be tested. And conclusion, radiation from wireless technology poses hazards to our health, and we're all at risk. 5G, we can expect to be more hazardous than 4G or 3G because plans are to terraform the entire Earth with more 4G antennas, millions more, 5G satellites and antennas, and also the higher frequencies of millimeter waves. We need to take personal action through advanced self-care to protect ourselves. We can't rely on our government to do this. It seems as though this is on a fast track, and despite all the activism that's arisen, I don't see it being stopped, unfortunately. Maybe moratoriums here and there, and there'll be the lucky regions where they will be absent, at least on the ground. We need to reduce our wireless exposure and use proven protective measures to improve and facilitate our overall well-being. And the last thing I want to read to you is a statement. Rudolf Steiner is one of my heroes. Oops, excuse me. I hit the wrong button. He didn't write any books, but he gave a lot of lectures. And, this is anthroposophy and anthroposophical medicine. And there are communities, the Steiner communities throughout the world. Steiner lived through the electrification of the earth and also the first flu, the big flu, 1918. I think he died in 1920. So this was the statement is at least 100 years old. Let me read it to you. We must be quite clear about this. In the days when there were no electric currents, when there were no electric wires buzzing in the air, it was easier to be human. In those days, these aromatic forces were not there, constantly robbing us of our body, even when we are awake. It was not necessary then for people to make such efforts in order to approach the spirit. That is why it is necessary today to muster far stronger spiritual forces merely to remain human than it was 100 years ago. So he's comparing 1920 to 1820, but today is 100 years yet. And he was disturbed just about electrification. I'm sure he would roll over in his grave if he saw what we have to cope with today. So that's the end of my lecture portion, and now I'll open it. Stop sharing. And now I look forward to your feedback and interest. And I'd especially like to hear from you if you've had an experience that 4G, 3G, or 5G is interfering with the dowsing response. I wonder about that. And I expect that it might.
Go ahead and raise your hand. Maybe I'll get things started, Doctor. Um, Tell me, do the effects on your blood, you did all this testing on your blood, did you notice that reversed itself, or did those blood cells become permanently affected only to have to be replenished by normal body sources 20
I
days
think it's
later or whatever?
reversible. I've only looked at a couple people in that regard, like myself and my husband, because in the study, those people were already 4 hours in my lab. And they also came and fasted. I honestly couldn't keep them any longer. They were eager to get out and get fed. So, I haven't found any further funding to look at how long does this effect last. I think now the really spiky cells could be taken out of circulation by the spleen. That's possible. When a cell is very damaged, that's what one of the functions of the spleen is to take red blood cells out of circulation that no longer are functional and recycle the iron. Um,
Thank you. Thank you. Um, Anybody wanting to ask Dr. Rubik a question? Okay, Elena Candavero, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead, ask your question.
Okay.
Elena?
Hi. Can you hear me? Yes.
yes.
Okay. This is maybe a comment more than it is a question. Um, I am in the town of Greenwich, Connecticut, and we have now just put together a petition. Just starting, this is like grassroots, okay? Petition, a legal document to hand into the town hall to stop the implementation of the 5G antennas. Now, we were told, or we were led to believe at the beginning, that the FCC prohibited any of this, as you had said in your talk. But upon hearing that Easton, Connecticut, a town, has already and has been the first town to put in a legal document to, I think it's the FCC, to prove that these antennas are safe, right? Because no tests have been done, as we all know, right? And that particular petition to would it be the mayor? I'm not quite sure, of the town of Easton, has been signed and approved, and basically I've heard that they have stopped. Now, this is taking off. Let's hope that it continues to rise, because with all this COVID-19, this stuff was going on, as we all know. I think they had a perfect storm brewing,
I think so.
Now that we see how it all played out, you stand there and shake your head and go, wow, that was pretty cool the way they did that.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly. I mean, think about it. When people have symptoms from 5G, which they may, more
yeah,
people, they'll say, oh, you know what? Another strain of the virus just showed up. We need another vaccine and more drugs.
yeah,
I can see the excuses
yeah.
being put on another pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyways, just to let you know that the Eastern Connecticut was successful
Mm.
for now in stopping. We are trying to basically. It was handed in to the our selectmen in our town of Greenwich this morning, I think, with it wasn't hundreds of names because we had just started and got as much as we could just to get it rolling. Okay, and hopefully we're going to keep it moving along. And then also
Yeah.
too, on the 5G summit that just took place, they also said the same thing, that even though we were told that we can't, do anything about it, there's it's the way it's worded, it's the way the legal document reads, and that we can do something. There's a part of me that says, give up before you even start, and then there's another part of me that says, no, I won't. I'm just gonna hold on. And I think if we could all support each other on this, who knows how this could all turn out? Really,
That's fantastic news about Easton. I didn't know about that. I live at the other end, of course, but yeah, I applaud you, and I hope you get what you desire there. And we'll be watching Connecticut carefully.
yeah, Easton has already has already been approved, but now Greenwich we're working on ours. So I just thought
Wonderful.
I'd share that with you. And thank you very much for all your information. It was very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Elena.
Wow.
Anybody else? Wow, you wowed everybody, I think. Oh,
I do
there's
see a
Mary
green
Farrell.
hand there. Is that
Mary
oh,
Farrell, go right ahead.
Hi, Beverly. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful evening. Um, one of the questions that I had about the spread and the connection to 5G was where the spread was in Italy is not an industrial area or developed area. So I was curious about that. And I also just wanted to point out there's a couple of questions in the chat boxes too. Thank
okay.
you.
I'll open that too. Um, I have to refer you to that Spanish study that pointed out that the regions of northern Italy, they might have been rural, but there was 5G there. They studied Italy carefully because it really, the cases sprung up very heavily there, as you may remember, initially and quickly. It was one of the fastest growing COVID regions for quite some time. So I have to defer you to that paper. They discuss it at length, and I don't remember all the arguments, but there was 5G rollout, particularly in northern Italy, where the cases existed. Also, there are a lot of Chinese people working in northern Italy in the fabric industry. You know, Milan is the fashion city, one of the fashion cities of the world, and I think the designers have employed a lot of Chinese people in factories making garments in northern Italy. So I'm wondering also about Chinese coming out of China, traveling to Italy, and bringing COVID is another possibility.
Yes, thank you. I did hear that there was a large Chinese population, but I was curious. I will look at that paper for that info about 5G in that area. Thank you.
Good. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mary. Looks like we have another call here. Oh, I just lost it. Where'd it go? Somebody just, SZ. I'm muting. Go ahead.
Hi, I was just gonna add that my husband is friends with people in Italy, and there was a rollout of 5G at the beginning. You know what I mean, when this happened over there, because he's got
Yeah.
a lot of friends that are in that area that it happened. That was really, really bad,
Right.
and there was a rollout of 5G.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that Spanish paper really 50 pages long. It is such a thorough analysis of regions with COVID and regions with 5G. You'd be amazed. They did a lot of work, and yet very hard to find that paper. I mean, you can't Google 5G and COVID-19 and expect to get it. It won't be searchable. This really scares me, you know, that we have this kind of censorship and the lack of critical thinking and not allowing critical thinking discourse about all the causes involved in this pandemic. That is really
Yeah,
scary for the United States of America,
it's
considering
also really
the First Amendment, etc.
it's really scary too because my husband is like really in tune with all of this stuff, and he's missing some YouTube videos from his Facebook that he had saved, and
Mm.
they disappeared. He can't
Yeah.
retrieve them so that he could, check them out again.
Well, yeah, lots of things show up. By the way, when I gave a talk in New York on this in November, November, um, it was taken down. It was on YouTube and it was removed. Now that was before COVID. There was nothing to say. Just on 5G and health hazards, it was removed.
Yeah, it's really scary.
It was put back on other sites, but it was, I was flabbergasted. Now I see it; it's more and more blatant, the censorship. And the way Google has become the ministry of truth, if you know what I mean. You have to think back to 1984 Brave New World technocracies of fiction, um, where what is official knowledge was controlled. And that's what we've moved into at this level now, as I see it, and it is very frightening.
It was the same thing when we were, like I said, my husband is fanatic about this, but the ABC Live um, during the riots, when it first started, they would like really broadcast it and say the truth about it. And then the further along it got, the helicopters would veer away from these certain sections, like it was censored. They weren't allowed to go in and see what was really going on. But you
Yeah.
can really see it a lot.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No.
I heard some squeak, like someone wanted to talk.
But thank you so much. It was absolutely amazing.
Good, good. Glad you enjoyed it. And hopefully we can turn things around um, to some level. I mean, even if we have some communities without it, then we'll have some level of comparison when people do get sick. Because I can expect more electro hypersensitives. But I really would like to ask that question. How do these artificial technologies affect the dowsing response? If you can't answer that now, I encourage you to look into it as dowsers, because I think it will affect it or does affect it.
I have a question for you, but before I do that, those folks on the telephone that are listening on the phone, if you want to ask a question, I believe it's *6 to raise your hand. Um, and Leidra, you'll correct me if I'm wrong on that. And my question to you is, have there been any correlations between um, the high numbers of people sick in New York and some of the big cities and their 5G introductions and things?
Well, in the United States, my understanding is the highest levels of 5G introduced early on have been Southern California, parts of Silicon Valley, and New York City. And those three areas have had high COVID-19 early on rates. Uh, so that's all very interesting. Of course, a virus does spread. You don't have to have 5G. Remember, I think 5G is a causal factor. I didn't say it was the cause. Obviously, a virus is causing the disease. But if you can't resist the virus because your immune system is disrupted, or because your blood is disrupted, then it exacerbates you getting sick and having the symptoms of COVID. So that's what I mean by causal factor. So yes, we need a virus, and these other things are exacerbating it, and that's bad news. I can just see this being used as an excuse. Another virus will be used as an excuse for the next problem when 5G installation is further along. They're going to say you know what? We've got to make another vaccine or get some more drugs rolling here. It's another strain.
Okay.
I see it coming, and it's very sad. Very sad.
Yeah, thank you. We got
Yeah,
a
take
telephone.
just a brief correction. Star two. If you're on your phone, star two raises your hand. Thank you.
Well, we have a phone. Somebody must have known how to do it. We have a phone caller here, 770-337-2498.
770, you're live. Go
Yes,
ahead.
yes. Hello. Yes, I put a couple questions in the chat box. I don't know if you can see the chat box. But I asked if you could maybe put the document ID, all these reports, they always have these SSID numbers or whatever,
You're talking about
into
the
the,
Spanish study?
yes, or any of the studies that say it's hard to
Let's
find. If
see.
you put the document,
Tell you what, I'll mail that the document. The website of the document to TIC at the American Dowser Society and let them put it up or make the link somehow. Because right now, for me to fiddle with this screen is too much difficulty. To go back to
okay.
what slide was that with that, you understand. I can do it after
Right,
this
yeah.
production. Okay.
Yeah, I had to go away and come back, so I'm going to have to rewatch. But I also wondered, you talked about how we can put positive frequencies into the 4G, and so I'm wondering, is there any sort of a guidance about that, or do we
No,
just kind
that's
of pray
really
for it?
the state of the art of, I would say, shall we say, possible protective technologies that we're all thinking about, those of us trying to make an antidote to this. There's got to be help that we can come up with for people as they roll it out. And it's, it will be hopefully not drugs, not just dealing with symptoms, but something that really will, once again, boost the biofield in the right ways to make it balanced and to make the chi flowings. And by the way, that picture of hypercoagulation that I showed you in the blood can also be considered in Chinese medicine stagnant blood related to stagnant chi. So if we get the chi moving through appropriate frequencies, we might prevent the stagnant blood and some of the issues then that come from that. Maybe not all the effects. I mean, these the 4G, 5G is causing changes at so many levels of our being, as I pointed out, from the genome all the way up to the behavioral level. I don't know that single remedies will work at all those levels. So we probably will need to use multiple strategies and many products to stay healthy in the future. And some of them may be clothing with wired silver threads in it. You can easily buy a t-shirt like this and cover your major organs. That's not a bad idea. And maybe a scarf around your head to keep your brain from being fried. So I can imagine fashion's going to change as we move forward, just to stay healthy.
Thank you for the question. We have another one from, I don't know if it's Mo or
Yes.
Ann. Oh, it's Mo. Hi, Mo.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, there you
Hey.
are. I see you.
Okay. I have a question. I work with a group of people and we do healing for the earth and the world. And we start everything that we ask for with the statement, I want, fill in the blank. And so I'm interested in a statement you might help us with to correct the problems of the world. What can we say in the blank? I want, fill in the blank.
Wow, that's a big
Yeah.
one. I want so many good things for this planet.
Just give
Well,
me two or three.
all right. I want the truth. I want the media to be released from the stranglehold of uh, of the control system where they can't report the truth. And there's a lot of independent journalists who do, but they're not in the mainstream media. I want to free science from the hijacking that has occurred, and let the truth seekers of science, uh, who respect nature and bring us out of this materialistic view of nature toward our right livelihood as servants of the planet, and in the image of made in the image of God. I mean, I could go on and on. There's so many things I want, but I'm a truth seeker. I'm a scientist, and I'm disgusted at the lies. I mean, and the hijacking in my own field by people who just take money to do and say what's so. I can tell you this. I've had people come to tell me throughout my career, Beverly, I agree with you, but I can't afford to agree with you publicly. What kind of scientists are they? It just makes me weep. But this is the reality. And I think, we see a world built on fraud and deception. We live in the age of information, but it's so full of deception. I want a world in which deception is gone and people do the right thing and make the right choices deep in their hearts. If all of us did this, I think our world would be the right place.
Thank you. This was wonderful. If I'm being unmuted, okay. Oh, I'm being unmuted. Oh, okay, so I can
You're
speak.
okay. I can hear you.
All right. The sentence you just said was wonderful. And I wonder if you would say it again and allow me to then ask higher power to help us with it.
I
And
don't know if I can
I
say it in
am
the same
very
way.
loud. I'm very loud. I'll
Well,
warn you.
I said so many things. Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking, Mo, I appreciate that. And I'm thinking maybe we'll allow Beverly to move on because I know that your guides can be rather loud. And I noticed that there's a number of questions in the chat as well, and we'd like to get to those. So thank you so much.
Good luck, Mo, and carry on.
Dick, did you want to address some of the questions that are in the chat?
Sure. One of the ones that they talked about, and Dr. Rubik, I don't know what, we're looking at 9:38 now, so we're over the 2 hours. I don't know how much
No,
more you
it's
want to
fine.
take.
I'm
Okay.
happy to take questions a little longer. And we
Okay.
started a little late. And I really want everybody to feel satisfied. This is so important to me. Getting the word out, hearing people and responding as best I can. So
Uh, P. Dorman asked that in Russia, apparently they banned microwave ovens back in the 70s. Uh, and are they any more safe in the home today?
it's interesting. I don't use a microwave oven, but I bought a device in Russia once that was a microwave detector. And back in the 1980s, I did use a microwave, and I turned my microwave oven on with something in there, and it leaked. In other words, the weak point of your microwave oven is the gasket, and that rubber or plastic gasket gets old and starts leaking. You got microwaves coming right out. And lots of people stand there and look at their food or their water boiling. It's not a good idea. Personally, microwaving water is so disruptive to the structure of water and food. I don't think it's healthy. I have learned from the Weston A. Price Foundation folks that it's best to cook everything at a low temperature oven. And so, like baking a chicken at 300 degrees instead of 375 is a healthier thing, and certainly not throwing it in a microwave and exploding the water molecules all over the place. So in multiple ways, I think microwaving our food is not healthy. For the exposure to microwaves, standing near the oven with gaskets around it that may be leaky, and the food quality that's so drastically manipulated by microwaves.
Thank you. Another one, Cindy asks, how can we put positive frequencies into 4G? And I think you already answered that question, but I know in acoustics they have active sound deadening, where if you send out if there's sound noise and you put a active noise and it actually cancels the noise. Is there an active EMF device that can actually cancel the EMF?
Well, if we were to cancel the EMF of 5G or 4G, then I'm afraid our devices wouldn't work, you know.
Well, yeah, of
But
course.
so that may be good for acoustics or you want to get rid of noise, but we want that signal if we want these devices to work. We need to find, and it's hard, it's empirical work. We need to discover all the positive life enhancing frequencies and use them in our technologies. This has never been done. In other words, we need broad-based science to explore the electromagnetic spectrum to come up with and which among the millimeter waves are really good for life, and then use those. I mean, why do we take 2.4 gigahertz for the microwave oven and for our Wi-Fi? Because that's goofy. I mean, that's a frequency that water absorbs that thwarts life energy. But it was free because it's among the free bands that industries don't have to pay for. So that's why they use it in Wi-Fi routers. I found out because I asked the question to an engineer. I said, "This seems crazy to me. You know, why do you want to microwave your whole room with Wi-Fi low level? I mean, like it's like being in a microwave oven at low level all the time." And they, well, it's a free frequency, but we need to rethink this whole thing. And instead of being based on money and what's, patentable, etc., our entire system needs an overhaul. The science and the technology. It's a huge undertaking, but if we have people who come from their hearts and connect with their minds and say, we want to do science and make it our right livelihood instead of just making money and stockholders rich, which industry has tended to do over decades now, maybe 100 years, and it's thwarting life on Earth, and we have to accept it and say if we're going to make it, we need to change our priorities here, and um, that that right to life, liberty, and happiness. It's written in our Constitution, but unfortunately, we're thwarting life and liberty and happiness too. So we're not even living up to it.
Thank you. There's a question about where they can contact you by email. I believe they can go online and just Google your name and it'll come out for the
Yeah.
Institute of Frontiers.
Yeah, you can email me at info at frontier sciences, there's an S on the end, .org.
And if anybody has any question on that, they can get a hold of Lisa at the office and she can give it to you there. I have another question here from Rebecca Gerland. Hang on just a second, Rebecca. I'll unmute you. There you go.
Hi there. Can you hear me all right? We're all
Very
confused
well.
on that. Thank you. Yes, I did want to reply about dowsing with Wi-Fi and such. Well, I don't have any Wi-Fi in my home. My husband's a bit sensitive, and just the idea of it, like, why do we need that? So we don't. And when dowsing, the group, I work with Mo Wheeler actually, but our group there does not, we're really careful not to have any devices or internet open when we're working with our dowsing. The other day, I realized in thinking about this, I doused by the computer. It's not Wi-Fi, but I usually don't do my dowsing in the room that has any devices. And I had a clear dowsing that day. So whether I was connected, protected myself, or whether because it wasn't Wi-Fi, I don't know. But just generally, I feel that I need to be away from that kind of influence when dowsing.
Yes. Well, thank you for that.
Thank you, Rebecca.
I'm glad you're aware. Thank you.
Thank you. I have read some studies that says that and I don't know what the frequency is, but radar, they did some studies, I don't remember when, 80s probably, where they blasted dowsers with this radar frequency. And again, I don't know, it's two gigs or whatever it is, 2 megs probably, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and they screwed up the dowsing response.
Mm.
I've read studies like that, and I can't quote where I got it, but I have read that. Yeah. If you need that, I can give that to you.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll be writing some things on this, some articles. So that's very important to know. And, I think dowsing is probably one of humanity's natural ways to find water. All the animals, of course, can find water in their own ways. And humans developed dowsing.
Yep.
And used intuition and maybe some landmarks. But I think it's a remarkable gift. And I really admire all of you for keeping it alive. But now I'm really concerned about it in this terraformed environment of technological waves coming soon. So let's try to turn that around. And we need to keep our humanity more than ever before. And you heard what Rudolf Steiner said, and that was 100 years ago. So it's, I never thought I'd see this kind of change in my lifetime. And I hope we can put an end to the transhumanism that seems to be taking over and restore our humanity.
I agree. I agree. All right. Well, it looks like the questions have gone down. Somebody asked if there are going to be any um, uh, reprints of this, if the recordings, we have recorded it. I've got to talk to Dr. Rubik tomorrow if it's up to her
Sure.
about how to make these available to the dowsing community and to her. And so hopefully it will be available for everybody.
We'll let you know. Okay.
All right. Well, again, thank you and thanks. And that's great. Thank you ever so much. Good to
Oh,
see
you're
you again.
welcome.
Geez,
And blessings
I
to all
won't
of
see you
you.
again for another many years.
Well, I hope to come to one of your meetings soon. And let's hope the meetings get reinstalled next year.
That would be nice, face to face. That would be great.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you again.
Okay. You're
It's been an
welcome.
absolute pleasure. All right. Goodbye.
Likewise. All the best to all of you. Bye bye.
Bye. Goodbye.